Well, good afternoon, and hello Todd, and hello Lisa, who are in the Zendo with me. I hope you can see Lisa from your point. And it's a privilege to be able to sit with them here. Olivia, welcome. Evelyn, Monica, Lisa K. So nice that you're here. Kim, thank you for watching over us from out on the internet. It's really great. So I'm going to give a talk about koans today. And what I hope that this talk will convey is a description of a journey that I've been on. It's very exciting to me and pleasing to me. And it's a way that I've found so that koans like Moo and like 3 pounds of flax and so other famous koans as part of the koan literature no longer seem like a slamming door to me, but instead sound like what I've heard Hakomi therapy described as being a kind of guided self-exploration. Now, I'm going to start and spend most of my time talking about my resistance to koans and then how those have resolved. And again, I hope that my example is some way helpful in that. I will say that the first thing that occurs to me in this transition is that my life circumstances have changed. I was a magazine editor for 10 years, a freelance writer for 10 years before that, and then a fundraiser for 25 years after being a magazine editor. All jobs in which criticism and evaluation were ever present. And I got good feedback and difficult feedback, and of course, obsessively focused on the negative feedback. But that changed. I'm retired now, and I really feel different. I really feel like it's like I was carrying around a tent, or I was living in a sweat lodge or something, and now that's lifted something. And that part of it before, when I thought about koans, I always thought, well, everybody's telling me I'm wrong all the time anyway. Why would I want to go do studying something where that will get reinforced? Again, that things should have changed. So I feel a new willingness to step outside my habitual box. I've also been lucky to encounter several really helpful books in recent months. Guogu's Passing Through the Gateless Barrier, and particularly Barry Magid's Nothing is Hidden, The Psychology of Zen Koans. As you probably know, Barry Magid was a student of Joko Beck's. He's a psychoanalyst practicing in New York. He's a very fluid writer who has many trenchant points to raise. He's also, in this book, surprisingly open about difficult aspects of his relationship with Joko, and values what he learned from her, but also shares some things that he found difficult in his relationship with her. But, as I say, what I think is a possibility is that koans, which I've resisted so much, can be a mode of guided self-discovery. And Peg and Flint, I mentioned this to them. I mentioned it to Todd, who's done some koan work, and their reaction has been kind of a very polite, measured kind of, duh. They've been able to explore this before. But like I say, my circumstances have been such that this was difficult. I've always been, from the very first time I encountered it, really attracted to the teaching that's called the Discourse to the Koans. The Buddha's meeting, sometime early in his teaching career, he already had a well-established retinue of followers who were going from place to place with him. But I want to read a section from this discourse and talk about what it has meant to me. So the Buddha goes to visit a place called Kesaputta, and there's a group of people called the Kalamas. I don't know if they're a tribe or a clan or what. The Kalamas of Kesaputta said to the Blessed One, Lord, there are some Brahmins and contemplatives who come to Kesaputta. They expound and glorify their own doctrines, but as for the doctrines of others, they deprecate them, revile them, show contempt for them, and disparage them. And then other Brahmins and contemplatives come to Kesaputta. They expound and glorify their own doctrines, but as for the doctrines of others, they deprecate them, revile them, show contempt for them, and disparage them. They leave us absolutely uncertain and in doubt. Which of these venerable Brahmins and contemplatives are speaking the truth? And which ones are lying? The Buddha replies, of course you are certain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and to suffering, then you know they are wrong and you should abandon them. He gives the same argument about proceeding from logic and through experiential tests to affirming what should be adopted. He says, now Kalamas, one who is a disciple of the noble ones, thus devoid of greed, devoid of ill will, undiluted, alert, and resolute, who keeps pervading the four directions with an awareness imbued with goodwill or loving kindness. Thus he keeps pervading all, above, below, and all around, everywhere and in every respect, the all-encompassing cosmos, with an awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. And then he uses the same wording, changing goodwill to compassion, and changing compassion to sympathetic joy, and changing sympathetic joy to forbearance. I always forget the word that's supposed to come there. Equanimity, sorry. So he says, if someone embodies, if you can see that someone is embodying those qualities, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, then you can take that into account in evaluating their activities, or their teachings. And then you can apply their teachings to your own life and see, do they result in you adopting attitudes of loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity? If so, those are true teachings. If not, they're not true. So I love that. And I love that, as Sharon Salzberg has written, that when you, as she says for herself, when she says that I take refuge in Buddha, she's taking refuge in the Buddha who is speaking at this time to the Koans. A person who says, not only am I, as a human being, able to make these judgments for myself, based on my experience and based on what I know will be wholesome, but everybody, he has that the Buddha has that expectation for all of us. And that seems like a joyous thing. So, now there is a danger in this. We know that we are not one person. We contain, as what Whitman said, multitudes. And we have a shadow side, many different voices, and we have the capacity to be selfish and to delude ourselves about our selfishness, and to make up excuses, to make up justifications. So I got a quote here from the wonderful writer Thanissaro Riku, who cautions, "This teaching is not carte blanche to follow one's sense of right and wrong. It actually says something much more rigorous than that. One's preferences are not to be followed simply because they seem logical or resonate with one's feelings. Instead, any view must be tested by the results it yields and put into practice, and they must be, and to guard against bias or limitations of one's own understanding, they should further be checked against the experience of people who are wise." And this introduces a value question here, but as the Buddha said, the wise person is one who shows evidence of the Brahma of the heart. So here I am back to my resistance. I still feel a lot of resistance to koans. Here's some reasons why. One, they are a body of literature describing interactions that mostly involving Chinese teachers and students. They typically have a structure in the way they're presented, where there's a frame, a case, that is a story that gets related, a commentary, a verse, and a commentary on the verse. And the language is also, is often opaque, and there are big differences in the culture from which they arose. For one thing, the people participating seem to be all monastics, living in monasteries, dedicated to a life of Buddhist practice. They may live out by themselves out on a mountainside, or they may be in a big monastery. That's a kind of a thriving farming business. There are what I think are probably unbridgeable gaps in the language in which these stories were first enacted and then told. I'm just looking, I've been today had the opportunity to be looking at the calligraphy on the walls, Japanese calligraphy based on Chinese characters, which themselves are beautiful visual representations of reality that come down to us in these kind of monosyllabic chunks of little atoms that cannot possibly convey the play and punning and the enjoyment that goes into these brushed on words. And with that, then there's differences in cultural expectations. I mentioned that these are about people who lived in a society in which monks, it was just a thing for people to go off, leave their homes, become a monk, and live that way. And that's pretty rare in our society these days, certainly in my social circle. They are also polemical stories. So the stories of Chan Buddhism are polemical in the sense that they are making a point about the role of Chan Buddhism. They assert over and over again, Chan is the way, Zen is the way, it's the only way, it's the only legitimate way. And in doing so, they obscure or erase the fact that they happened in a social milieu where there were other claimants to legitimacy. So they are polemical in that sense. And as I said before, the interactions tend to be very enigmatic. So here's one example, cited by Mary Manton. Liu arrives at Kuei Shan's place, and Kuei Shan says, "Old cow, you've come." Liu says, "There's a big feast on at Mount Taishan tomorrow. Are you going?" Kuei Shan lays down. With that, Liu leaves. So, a lot of questions there. Guo Gu, the commentator who wrote the book Passing Through the Gateless Barrier, koan practice for real life says that koans are not intentionally confusing, and they're not intended to be baffling. However, that it's a case that you don't solve them, but use them to dissolve self-referentiality. This is something I love. That's where I'm moving toward right now. Also, and this is a big one for me, the interactions that happen, like this one between you and Kuei Shan. What's the point? I can't, it's opaque to me. And even if I could understand it, would it lead me to loving kindness and compassion? I don't know. It seems pretty dry. It seems like it's like they're having a debate about a philosophical point that involves enacting certain physical things to prove that words are not up to conveying what they're trying to say. Something like that. Again, that just doesn't seem that engaging to me. Compare that to the teaching story from the Buddha's early career. I cited this last Sunday in the talk I gave about Kesa Gotami, a woman who lived in the part of India where the Buddha was at that time. Again, apparently it was early in his career. He was a resident at this town. Her name is Gotami and his name was Gotama, so maybe they were somehow related. She has a child, and her child dies, gets sick and dies. And she is stricken with grief. She carries her child around the town and asks for help. And the townspeople, unable to offer any help, suggest that she go and talk to the Buddha. She goes to see the Buddha and says, "Can you bring my child back to life, please?" He says, "I can do it if you can bring me a mustard seed in my house where no one has suffered grief, where no one has lost someone that they love." She goes all over town. She asks at door after door after door. In each case, people want to help her, but they say, "But my uncle died last year. My wife has died. My son has died." Everyone has the same story. So Kesa Gotami returns to the Buddha and says, "I couldn't bring you a mustard seed." But she comes with a change heart and a change deep within her, that she now knows that she is connected with everyone else through this terrible experience and through the grief that she has over her loss. And the story is that she then goes on to become a follower of the Buddha, and one of the leaders in the Zen. Another problem I have. Very often, the stories in the koans, to me, and this is when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about what amounts to a self-portrait. This is totally my projection. But it seems to me that one is being seduced into accepting and affirming a certain type of relationship between the person who shows up with the question and the master who is going to evaluate whether that question can even be accepted, much less answered, much less whether that answer can be regarded as awakening. And that there's a big power imbalance in it. And that's always bugged me. And worse than that, in a lot of the stories, the unknown person, or stooge, as I sometimes think of them in evaluating these stories, gets treated very brusquely and brushed off and treated abruptly. And that's when I was, at the beginning, when I was saying that I react to koan study as if it is a slamming door. That's what I'm talking about. So, let me take another digression here. In preparing for this, I've been reading a lot of stuff, and I also happen to be listening to a book, a recorded book when I go out for walks, by a doctor at Harvard Medical School named Judson Brewer, who's a well-known meditation teacher as well, longtime practitioner in the Theravada tradition, who's now becoming rich through his apps, cell phone apps and so on, that are about alleviating anxiety and overcoming addictions in various ways, and using mindfulness meditation as the key element to healing parts of ourselves and thus being able to address all these addictive things that we do, where we take refuge in maladaptive behavior. He points out that there's a part of the brain that together, or it's many different parts that act together, and they're called the nucleus accumbens. And that this assembly of things that reward us with different types of chemicals and that give us chemicals which enable us to act, this structure is conserved all the way up from sea slugs through mammal chordates and mammals up to human beings. And that it is this structure which enables all evolved forms of life to be able to move toward food, towards sexual reproduction, to avoid danger, to avoid poison, and just to keep things together, right? Very, very powerful evolutionary conservation, as they say. And in humans, he points out, this is also the structure that has come to serve as the seat of our need and our gratification from being connected with one another. So that there is literally no space in the brain between being connected with one another and survival. In terms of those structures. He gives a wonderful example. It comes from a radio show he was listening to called This American Life, which you may have heard, in which a group of middle school students were interviewed by Ira Glass, and they were talking about being on Instagram, posting photographs on Instagram, and then monitoring the likes that they get for their posts, and how important it was to them, and how they recognized in remarkably precise ways how they were obsessively driven to check those likes. They just said, it's the most important thing to me in the world is to know that other people are watching out for me, recognizing me, and accepting me. And this affirmation of being seen and accepted is something that when Judson Brewer tested people on various thought patterns and then had them in MRI machines where their brain patterns would be tested or observed, the nucleus accumbens lit up very strongly. And in some cases more strongly than in stimulus from food or other pleasant things. So the last point I want to make is about that interaction, that the interactions seem to be dismissive, and that that seems really hurtful to me. I really sympathize, with people who are being put down and who are being brushed off and sent away and that sort of stuff. I've talked in the past about one of the Zen teachers who was Dongshan's teacher, Yunyan, and this was done to him for decades, apparently, by his older brother and his teachers. They just brush him off, and that There's something about those stories that really gets me. So and part of it, and then finally, I'm finally getting to the end of my list of resistance here. But finally, I've never understood how I can bring myself to meeting koans, since it seems like that door is closed from the start. Like whatever your rational thoughts, not good enough. Your automatic reactions, forget that. You're just not allowed to bring any of that stuff with you. Luckily, I have found this book by Barry Magid, in which he says, actually, that's not true. Those are actually acceptable tools that can be useful in proceeding. So, here's one other story that I want to tell. This is actually from Passing Through the Gateless Barrier. It's case number 18. Dongshan's 3 pounds of flax. And I quoted from this last time. One time, when a monk asked Dongshan, "What is Buddha?" Dongshan responded, 3 pounds of flax. Wu Men, or Wu Man, comments, old man Dongshan had learned a bit of oyster charm. As soon as he opens his shell, he shows his liver and guts. Nevertheless, tell me where or how do you see Dongshan? And then the verse, the abrupt utterance of 3 pounds of flax. These words are close to the truth, but the intention is even closer. Those who talk about yes or no, affirm or deny, are just yes and no people. So who wants to be just a yes and no person in that story? I don't know. It doesn't sound very appealing. What Guru says, our discriminating mind is characterized by yes and no, affirmation and denial, such as, I like this, I don't like that, this is good, that is bad. And by thoughts like, I understand now, everything is good in nature, enlightenment is everywhere. All of these are products of the discriminating mind. So how do you see the liver and guts, the heart, a Chan, in this answer? You would have to meditate on what is Buddha, 3 pounds of flax. Why? Why is Buddha 3 pounds of flax? This is the watto, a critical phrase of this going on. Arouse an earnest desire to resolve this. Embrace the not knowing. This is the way to see the liver and guts of Dongshan. I have not found that guidance very helpful. But there's something else which transformed it for me. I read a comment by a now deceased Buddhist scholar named John McCrae, who taught at Indiana University. And he wrote a book called Seeing Through Zen, in which he really, really emphasized the polemical nature of Zen and the Chan stories, all the lineage stories within Chan and Japanese Zen as well. And he really emphasized the things that were left out in the telling of the stories, and the big gaps that were in them. And one of the things that he says about this particular koan is that there is a social context in which it occurred. And that social context was that monasteries could not exist without the support of powerful patrons. You know how difficult it is to keep any organization afloat that is not a money-making business, right? Nonprofits need to raise money all the time. It gave me a career. He says that what Dongshan is actually referring to is the fact that each new monk, when they came to a monastery, came as a stream of income to the monastery from the state. And that metaphorically, he's saying that 3 pounds of flax that will go into the clothing for a new monk are a metaphor for that state support. So after reading this, my first thought was, well, does this debunk the story? Does it somehow devalue the story of what Dongshan is saying to the young monk who is asked, what is Buddha? I don't think so. It just hit me that no. And that really the first turn for me is that Dongshan is treating this young monk as a peer. He's not brushing him off. He is treating him as a peer. And he's saying, you and I both know, because we are aware of the system, which will be left out in the later versions of the story, but we are aware of the state support that's keeping this place going. And yeah, I'm a major figure in this monastery, and you're just new here. But we both know this. And maybe that's not something that we're happy about. Maybe it's something that we have to grapple with day after day, that we are under the thumb of the state, essentially. And if the local lord or the king or whoever it is that's supporting this place decides that he wants a different religious focus, or he wants to start his own different monastery with a head monk that's more amenable to his to hiring his nephew as abbot, something like that, that we have a kind of threat behind this support, and that we are living with that, and that is a koan for our lives. So to me, that's a transformational shift in perspective. That it is possible through gaining a little bit more understanding of perspective, or a little bit more understanding of background in the stories, to see them as much more sympathetic, see them as much more relational, and relational in terms of relationships that are not totally bound up with maintaining authority and roles, but real actual sharing. So again, I told Peg and Flint about this discovery, and I talked to Todd about it, and their reaction was like, yeah, you're just finding that out, Joel? It's just the way it is in my life. I am just finding this out, it's true. But I hope that this is, in a way, a kind of an invitation, or just an example, that it's never too late. Maybe you have to wait until some big life changes makes it possible, but there are ways into these teachings which help reveal the depths of their resources. So I hope that's helpful. And it is now 1:05. So the next thing is to have the group activity. And I want to read from another book, a wonderful other book that I recently found out about. Let me find the cover of it here. It's called Householder Koans. And I'll send out a link to it later. But it's by 2 women who are members of the Vermont Zen Sangha in Breadloaf, Vermont. And they write about modern American life sort of situations in ways that are timeless. This one begins with some bad words, so I apologize for that. So it's called The Shit Abides. You're always like this. This is the verse. You're always like this. You never do that. Always, never, always, never. Lovebirds. The speaker of that is someone named Clemens. Clemens, drowning in love and rancor, wonders, how can I enjoy a relationship with my loved one when we're both caught in a cage full of shit. Through the cage's windows and, no, I'm sorry, although the cage's windows and doors are wide open, the excrement never seems to leave the room. Reflection. A friend of mine, another Zen teacher, cleans his desk and leaves it neat and immaculate at the end of each day. My desk has piles of books, notebooks, and papers day and night. Each week, I move some piles around, dust around them, and move them back. Aren't relationships more like my desk than like my friends? In fact, aren't they a lot like bird cages? There's song all day long, maybe, accompanied by bird excrement. At the end of the day, we remove the dirty paper bottom, stained by husks of seed and bird waste, replace the paper, cover the cage so that the bird will sleep, and the next day, song and shit start all over again. This goes on even in the most mature and happiest of marriages. Zen teaches that we are all empty of a permanent, autonomous self, that the essence of who we are is relational, co-arising with everything else in the world. It's not that nothing exists. We certainly have personality traits and a distinctive approach to life. But those characteristics are fluid and dynamic, not to be pinpointed and nailed down. They are our song, the bass and treble of our lives, endlessly creating new melodies. Sometimes they are harmonious, and sometimes they are atonal, even dissonant. In the latter case, we often say they sound terrible. Isn't that the way we listen to the songs of the people around us, family members, friends, and especially the persons we love? In our mind, we freeze their ever-changing song into a kind of a movie theme, the same melody with only a few variations, and we call that movie theme him or her. We create stories, impressions, and thumbnail descriptions of them that feel permanent and clear, cutting them down to a graspable size. I can only inquire who I am at this moment. Who is it? Who is that I, now living with a man or woman whom I love? A person, an energy, a moment? And who is that him or her whom I love, but at whom I'm very angry right now? Anytime you think you know who that person is, you're already wrong, because the moment has changed. Circumstances are different. So you, she, and he are different. No one is a fixed quantity. So your opinion can't be fixed either. Life is alive and dynamic. Clinging to a fixed opinion about someone, you're always complaining, you never do what you say you'll do, is like taking a person's free, sprawling energy and trying to cage it up with your opinions. When you do that, don't you cage yourself up too? Don't you cage up your relationship? The comment at the end, what do you do with the trash in your relationship? Opening up the doors and windows helps, but what are you doing with your opinions? So among the cascade of mistakes I have made today, a big one is that I didn't start by saying, I would like you to listen to this story and then just think about your reactions. You don't have to come up with any answers. You don't have to say, opening up the windows and doors helps, but what are you doing with your opinions? You don't have to respond to that directly. But I'm just curious if you would be willing to share anything about what what resistance arose within you on hearing this modern day koan, or what seemed to make sense to you. So take a couple minutes and raise your hand if you want to say anything. Thank you. Monica, Kim, can you unmute Monica?
Was Lisa's hands up first?
Oh,
Lisa?
Lisa, I'm sorry. Lisa. Okay, thank you very much.
And then I'll go. That's great.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see it on the screen.
Yeah, it's light.
Oh, that's fine. I would rather you go first, Monica.
Oh, no problem. So when you said sort of your reactions at the end, I still was feeling some amusement about the koan for several reasons. And well, first of all, when you apologized for the language, I'm always fine with the language. It actually helps me understand things better. I don't know what's, but also in particular, talking about the image of the bird cage, and I'm thinking of, for me, a marriage, and in the cage, and then there's the shit in there, or the daily everything and strife and whatever, and the doors and windows could open and let it out, but I think you said something like the shit still stays there, and it just, to me, that was a humorous way of thinking about just ups and downs of either each day or periods in a relationship. And then just thinking about being, if you're in the present moment, yes, it can be clean if you just stay in that present moment and deal with what is right then at that moment. But it also often involves the work of taking the paper out and cleaning up the mess. Anyway, I found it pretty delightful as a koan, and I have some resistance to koans also, so thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Lisa Kuntz?
Okay. So I'd like to confirm that last line, was that your opinions are trash or something like that? Is that true, or is that just what I heard?
So the last part was, what do you do with the trash in your relationship? Opening up the doors and windows helps. Well, what are you doing with your opinions?
Well, I compressed it. I compressed it into, well, I don't always know what I'm going to say when I start, but it's like, oh, what am I doing with my opinions? Because the words that I selected out were trash and opinions. And, what my self-reflection on that is, well, it's that tricky thing of, we can't really abandon all of our preferences. I actually started listening to Nothing is Hidden as our intensive started. So, that's working really well. So he's saying, well, we can't it's just delusion to think we can get rid of all our preferences. So if we can't get rid of our preferences, some of what's left is opinion. When you don't have preferences, to some extent, I guess my question that's left is opinion what is left? And getting back to this bird cage, which is full, just not just of bird shit, but it's little feathers and debris. I had a canary when I was a child. They're messy, right? They're messy. So to me, it's like, the koan actually starts unfolding by talking about it. So we've got trash opinions, we've got bird shit, but then we've got feathers and maybe mites. And then maybe if it were a canary, sometimes it's singing and sometimes it's sick. I even had a canary die. So the trash must be thrown out. I don't know if we need to throw all of our opinions out. I don't like myself when I'm opinionated. So that's what goes along with it. Is that I was left thinking about, oh, well, sometimes something I wish to change about myself is I have a very strong opinion about something. I have a strong opinion about something I'm thinking about right now. So that's my meandering answer. A lot to work with.
I want to jump in. Kim, I'll call you in just a second. I want to say that I chose to read this one because I have an older brother whom I regard with a very fixed opinion. I think that he never does certain things and he always does certain things. And it's going to take a lot for me to let go of that opinion and to, even though I've done a lot of work on this in the past, and I've been able to see how this is a trap for me. That that it's not about. I mean, it's about him, sure, but it's mostly a trap for me. That it's a block for me to be able to express any kind of connection with him. And I'm very interested in getting past that, but I have a lot of resistance that comes up, and a lot of fear that comes up when I contemplate that, and it takes the form of those phrases that were used at the beginning of the koan. Always do this, never do that. Even though I know that that's not true. Kim?
Yeah, well, what I enjoyed so much about your talk was that you were looking at your opinion, and you know what we see in the translation we use of the Xing Ming was it was about not being attached to your preferences as opposed to not having them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important distinction because as human beings we have them, but we drown in them often. And so your willingness to look at your opinion about koans opened that up for you. And I guess that's all that I wanted to say. That seems to be where we need to go, is to recognize we do have opinions and that's what they are. And then I think that also helps us connect with others who have opposite opinions, that realizing that they're not, that it's the stuckness in the opinions that's the problem, not the opinion itself. Their unwillingness, like when you talk about your brother, the unwillingness to see this more like fact than opinion. Because we don't know, that seems to be, what was it that, it was so nice what Flint said yesterday in practice discussion. Here we go. The 3 steps of not knowing, bearing witness, and then compassionate action. And I really like that. Starting with the not knowing. And then also we talked about in the group about how you don't forget the first 2 of not knowing and bearing witness as you're doing the compassion, but you keep going around and around. And I thought that was a good deal. And with the koans too, like your explanation of the flaxseed one, that's an opening for it. But if then you discard the koan, you've lost something. You know what I mean? It's not like you're finished with it by figuring this out. That, well, that's the weight of a monk's robe or something. I mean, it's a kind of a trap too, getting that little bit of information that gives you the solution.
Certainly, that's something that's pointed to in the literature and all the commentaries on koans often, that it's a trap to think that you've solved it, and that I got something in my notes, and I think it's from Guo Gu, that koans are not things to solve, but things that dissolve self-referentiality,
I mean, how do you like it when someone says, I get you, or I understand you? You know, it's kind of like they have power over you. You know, no one really, even we don't understand ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of kill it. Or if you understand a work of art, is, you know, have you killed it? Or is it, you keep it from allowing to flower, in a
Right.
sense?
Right. Well, certainly that seems to be the point of the comments made by the authors of the Householder koan. That to the extent that you are saying, "Oh, I get you," you know, you are this tune only, and that's all you'll ever be, and you will never do anything else. But that's a mistake, given the fluid nature of our existence and our constantly changing perceptions as well. That there's, you know, that the seduction is that it's self-protective, and that's what I know about what I'm describing as a difficulty with my brother is that it is based in fear, you know, based in fear and based in desire to protect myself. I'm finally getting to the point where that is shrinking enough so that the desire for connection can get a little bit of a lead, you know, for once. And I think your point is right that, you know, that it is the mistake is clinging, not having opinions, not having expectations or preferences. It's just insisting that life conform to what those are instead of what it's going to be. Right? Lisa?
I'm kind of feeding back into your idea of the nucleus accumbens and the pleasure that we derive from a meeting or connection with another mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
So let me hang on just 1 second. So can you hear what Lisa Judge is saying? Lisa, why don't you come over here by the this is actually the microphone right here. Yeah.
is this better?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And why don't you take your mask for a minute? Because
Well,
you have a soft voice.
Nothing profound, but I'm feeding back into the idea of the nucleus accumbens that you mentioned and the pleasure that is created from, I think, a meeting of minds or a sense of connection with someone else. And that, and I don't understand this concept, so I may not be getting it right. The idea of codependent arising, which is kind of a co-creation in a relationship when we meet someone else. And I'm kind of riffing off a session I had with a client this week where she brought me up short to the fact that I wasn't meeting her where she was. It was my agenda as a therapist that I think was intruding in being able to stay with an experience she was having. And so I had to get rid of my self-referentiality in order to kind of co-create or codependently arise with her. And I've had people tell me that that pleasure of meaning is worth more than $1 million to them. And I appreciate what you said about the nucleus accumbens, because I didn't know that was the part of the brain that was Anyway, it's not easy to do that, but our opinions get in the way of our being able to meet someone. So it's fine. It's fine.
Thank you.
Well, there's one thing I would say that just this is just an observation of something that came to my mind in listening to the reader's description of the relationship and the bird cage and situation in the excrement, and maybe I should have thought of this before I started opening my mouth. I had a thought there. It was more an observation of a particular state of mind or perspective about the relationship that seemed to color the whole metaphorical description. It seemed like he was having a bad day. It wasn't going very well, right? And that while he was trying to discursively, conceptually rationalize what was happening, it seemed to all be coming from a place of not liking, of upset to me. So, just putting that out there.
Yeah.
The very same person at the beginning of the relationship might not have called that excrement, but gold that was coming out.
Something, yeah, exactly.